Picture your last truly free afternoon. No emails, no errands, nothing pulling at you. Now imagine having that feeling most days of your life. That is not a fantasy about early retirement. According to the people who have actually measured it, that was closer to a normal Tuesday for your ancestors 60,000 years ago. You have probably heard the opposite. The image everyone carries around is a caveman sprinting from one crisis to the next, starving half the year, clawing out every calorie, dead by 30. Constant struggle, no rest, no room for anything but survival. It is a vivid picture. It is also, according to the researchers who study this for a living, mostly wrong. So, what did prehistoric people actually do with their days? The answer turns out to be one of the more surprising reversals in modern anthropology, and it says something uncomfortable about how you spend your own week right now. Start with the anthropologist who first blew this idea open. In 1968, Marshall Solins presented a paper that anthropologists still argue about today. He looked at the emerging data on hunter-gatherer societies and made a claim that sounded almost like a joke. He called them the original affluent society. Not affluent because they had more stuff. Affluent because they wanted less, and what they needed took only a few hours a day to get. Solins was not romanticizing hardship away. He was pointing at something in the numbers that did not fit the caveman in crisis story. Decades later, better data confirmed just how right he was, and it came from an unexpected source: your metabolism. Herman Poncer, a biological anthropologist at Duke University, spent years with the Hadza, a community of hunter-gatherers in northern Tanzania, who still forage for the large majority of their food. Poncer's team strapped doubly-labeled water tracers onto Hadza foragers and measured with real precision how many calories they actually burned in a day of hunting, digging, and gathering. The result surprised almost everyone in the field. Hadza foragers, despite walking miles and digging up tubers and tracking game, burned roughly the same total daily energy as an average adult sitting in an office in London or Los Angeles. Their bodies were not running some ancient survival engine on overdrive. They were doing real physical work, and their metabolism had simply adapted to make that work energetically ordinary, not extraordinary. That finding forced a second question. If foraging was not a non-stop physical grind, how much time did it actually take? This is where the ethnographic record gets specific. Frank Marlowe, another anthropologist who lived among and documented the Hadza for years, tracked exactly how their days broke down. Adults typically spent somewhere in the range of 4 to 6 hours on activities directly tied to getting food, tracking animals, digging up roots, collecting honey, gathering baobab fruit. The rest of the day, once food was secured, went to something you would recognize instantly: socializing, resting in the shade, telling stories, making and repairing tools, grooming, arguing, laughing, doing very little at all. That is not a lucky exception. It shows up again and again across foraging societies that anthropologists have studied closely. One of the clearest examples comes from a different continent entirely. Vivek Venkataraman, who has spent extensive time studying the Batek people, forest foragers in the rainforests of Malaysia, documented something almost startling: long, uninterrupted stretches of what can only be called leisure, woven right through the middle of the workday, not squeezed into evenings after exhaustion. Naps, unhurried conversation, children playing while adults watched loosely rather than supervised intensely. The forest provided enough, reliably enough, that a rigid all-day work schedule was not just unnecessary, it would have been a strange, self-imposed burden. It is worth pausing on how differently men and women filled those hours, because the split itself tells you something about how flexible this system really was. Among the Hadza, men often spent their focused hours tracking large game, a pursuit with a low success rate on any given day, sometimes coming back with nothing at all. Women, meanwhile, handled a steadier and more reliable source of calories: digging tubers, gathering berries, collecting baobab fruit. That combination mattered. A bad hunting day did not mean a hungry night, because the group was never relying on one strategy alone. Researchers studying this division of labor have pointed out that it functioned less like a strict rulebook and more like a hedge, a way of making sure the group's total effort stayed both modest and reliable at the same time. Children were folded into this rhythm early, not through formal schooling but by tagging along, watching, and mimicking. which meant that even a child's day looked less like structured instruction and more like the same loose blend of light work and open time the adults were living. So here is the mechanism underneath all of this, the part that actually explains why this pattern shows up so consistently. Foraging economies are built around what researchers call a demand-sharing system. Food that one person finds gets distributed across the group, which means no single person has to guarantee their own daily survival alone. Combine that with the fact that most environments hunter-gatherers lived and produced enough calories with only part of a day's effort, and you get societies where working past the point of enough bought you nothing. There was no bank account to grow, no surplus to hoard for status, and often nowhere to store extra food anyway before it spoiled. Once you had enough for today, more effort was not more security. It was just more effort. This is the part that reframes everything. Your ancestors were not lazy, and they were not desperate. They were running an economy tuned to a very different goal than the one you are running today. Their target was sufficiency. Get enough, then stop, then live your actual life, the relationships, the rest, the stories around the fire that held the group together, and pass down everything from where the water was to which plants would make you sick. Anthropologists increasingly argue that this unstructured social time was not a reward for finishing work. It was the work. It built the trust and shared knowledge that kept a small group alive across generations, in a way that grinding out extra hours of foraging never could. Think about what actually got transmitted around a fire at the end of one of those short workdays. Not entertainment in the modern sense, but survival information disguised as conversation, where the water held even in a dry season. Which neighboring group could be trusted and which could not? How to read a set of tracks? How to nap a better blade? Which plant looked edible but would make you sick? None of that information moved through lectures. It moved through hours of unhurried talk, repeated over years, absorbed by children who were simply present. A schedule that consumed the whole day in foraging would have quietly starved the group of exactly this kind of knowledge, even while technically keeping everyone fed. In that light, the free hours were not a gap in the system. They were a load-bearing part of it. There is also a slower, generational version of this same story, and it comes from research into a pattern anthropologists call the grandmother effect. Kristen Hawkes, working with the Hadza, noticed that older women who were past their own childbearing years were often among the most productive foragers in the entire camp, spending long hours digging tubers not for themselves but for their grandchildren. Her data suggested this labor measurably improved a grandchild's chances of surviving and thriving. It is a strange thing to find buried inside a conversation about free time, but it points at the same underlying logic. The hours a person spent were not simply about keeping their own body fed for one more day. They were an investment, deliberately aimed at other people, in a system that had enough slack in it to make that kind of investment possible. Now hold that up against your own week. Modern economies are not built around sufficiency. They are built around growth, and growth has no natural stopping point. There is always a next quarter, a next promotion, a next thing to optimize, which is part of why I should be doing more can feel like a physical itch even when your actual needs are already met. That itch is not some ancient survival instinct misfiring. If anything, it is closer to the opposite. Your body carries wiring built for a world where enough was enough, and the day had a natural edge to it. What changed was not you. It was the economic system telling you the edge no longer exists. That is not an argument that prehistoric life was easy. Disease, injury, and unpredictable seasons were real threats that could hit hard and fast. But the day-to-day texture of that life, hour by hour, was not the non-stop grind popular culture keeps handing you. It was closer to a rhythm-focused effort, then a wide-open stretch of time that belonged to nothing but the people around you. So the next time your calendar is packed edge to edge, and some part of you insists that is simply how humans have always lived, remember what the tracers on the Hadza actually measured, what Marlowe actually counted, what Venkataraman actually watched unfold in the Malaysian forest. For most of human history, a finished workday did not lead to another task. It led to sitting down, next to people who mattered, with nothing left to prove.